Good afternoon and welcome to this week's reflection. I would say happy Thanksgiving, but it feels kind of weird to be like, hey, happy, remember that time when indigenous people didn't let like Europeans starve to death and then they repaid them by slowly taking over the continent and annihilating a huge portion of the native population. And I only bring that up because I find that interesting, and I'm going to tie it in here to the monoculture idea because we've seen Columbus Day as it gained traction between the different subcultures within the monoculture. And I think that if you recall back to what Alex had talked about, and I think that that's an apt description of the world today, as we are now a larger monoculture, and that's a result of globalization and the proliferation of like Western ideology. And I mean, capitalist, consumerist, whatever you want to call it, like the war on the Cold War and the cultural Cold War. There we go. That's what I'm going to call it. The cultural Cold War that took place from 1945 until now, I think has inevitably created a monoculture where, as we've talked about, like I can find Coke in Manila, I can find a Pepsi in Buenos Aires. I can travel the world and never not eat McDonald's. I could legitimately do that. I mean, I could get a chicken mac Taj Mahal thing in India, not a Big Mac, but I can literally travel the whole world and never leave my comfort zone as a Western person. And I find that really interesting and something that we tried to kind of talk about. And I think it is true that we are a monoculture and it's very Western. And even the subcultures within that somehow are all not Western, but they somehow get subsumed or sucked in to the larger culture and then um, are trying to redefine themselves as a new counterculture. And I think we talked about that, especially with punk, how it started out as this fringe sort of thing. It was marked by certain aesthetics, certain things, and then as it gained popularity and whatnot, it slowly became like sucked in, and elements were picked apart and used and spread about through other cultures. And I think that's what just inevitably ends up happening is like things get subsumed by that monoculture when it wants them. And I think when it wants them, like it's usually the rich people in the monoculture making that distinction. Because I think about art and like Jean-Pierre Basquiat and like the 80s street art movement and 90s, and now you've got Banksy, and how these things weren't really looked at as art or valid like Banksy is now because of Basquiat and others. But like Basquiat was like looked at like, what are you doing? Or same with Warhol and pop art. Like they're all looked at like as like, ooh, what are you doing? You shouldn't be doing that, until somebody within that upper class like is like, ooh, learns to appreciate it, and then they suck it in. And I would agree with Horkheimer and Adorno, and I still love saying Horkheimer. I say it all the time in my head just to myself. I'm like Horkheimer. Um, but here's a quote about like kind of that gets at the heart of that. Like the ruthless unity in the culture industry is evidence of what will happen in politics. Marked differentiations such as those of A and B films or of stories in magazines in different price ranges depend not so much on subject matter as on classifying, organizing, and labeling consumers. And I think that that's what I'm getting at here is like that monoculture wants to classify, label, and whatnot all of its consumers, and then when they deem something worthy, then they elevate it to like their class and like things that only they can afford. Because if you look at like art and stuff, like you can go, if you were lucky enough to get an unnamed like piece of an artist who's famous before they made it big. Like I think Basquiat would sell his like doodles and drawings for a buck here and there, and like did a lot of like little tiny things. And I know other artists have done that to get by, and like those are actually worth significant money now, because like eventually the bourgeoisie, like the social elite, were like, this needs to come to our level of the culture and we absorb it. And yeah, I think that that's I want to try to tie this all back to Heidegger and Althusser, because I do believe that like our perception of reality is highly influenced by the social structures around us. And I mean, you can see that like now, and I'm going to stick with my Thanksgiving Christopher Columbus Day example. Columbus Day, out of fashion, dude's finally getting the footnote of, hey, he had an idea, it was completely wrong, and he ran into some land, and he gets to be like this genius for it. That's an oversimplification of it, but like he's finally starting to get his comeuppance, for lack of a better word. Is like they're like, no, this is actually what happened. That doesn't diminish that he found this stuff, but let's like paint a truer light on it. And I think that that's interesting because Thanksgiving and other holidays are kind of untouchable right now within that monoculture until it gains enough traction. And I think eventually that could happen with Thanksgiving. But I'm going to stop there because I've just been ranting like a tinfoil hatty person for now 5 minutes about monoculture and subcultures and how the world has become a globally interconnected thing. And I should just wear a tinfoil hat and go hide in a closet for the rest of the day. But yeah, that's my reflection on the monoculture. And yeah, Horkheimer. Have a good Thanksgiving, and I will see you on Monday.